Good morning to the members of the Guam Tax Commission. We'll go ahead and call this regular meeting for Tuesday, December 6, 2016 to order. And if I could ask Mr. Jansen to please take a roll of the membership. Present. Thank you, Mr. Jensen. We do have a quorum for today's meeting, and with that, I would like to ask for a motion to adopt our agenda for today. Moved by Mr. Shringi. Is there a second? Second by Ms. McKeever. No objections. So ordered. We will adopt today's session agenda and move on to an adoption of our minutes for the official record of the Tax Commission. If anybody needs a minute to review the minutes. If not, a motion, please, to adopt the minutes. Moved by Dr. Jones, seconded by Mr. Shringi. No objections. So ordered. Our minutes are adopted, and we can go ahead and move on to our main item for today's meeting, which is the estimated impacts of the Trump tax plan. Mr. Jansen was tasked to evaluate the proposals of President-elect Trump and apply those tax proposals to the circumstances here that we have here on Guam. And I'll go ahead and just read through the paper that he was able to put together. It was very well done. During the election, candidate Donald J. Trump unveiled two tax plans. The initial tax plan had more sweeping changes to U.S. federal income taxes and would have greatly reduced federal revenue. The more recent plan also significantly reduces federal revenue, but the revenue losses have been reduced somewhat. Due to the linkage between the Guam Territorial Income Tax and the federal income tax, if the federal income tax is changed in the way suggested by the plan, the government of Guam will lose Guam Territorial Income Tax revenue. According to analysis by the Tax Policy Center, using the Urban Brookings Tax Policy Center microsimulation model, revenue from the average household in 2017 will decrease by approximately $2,940. If there are about 43,000 households on Guam, that could translate to about $126.4 million on a static basis in lost Government of Guam revenue for fiscal year 2017. Compared to an estimate of FY 2017 revenue, this could translate into a loss of approximately 32% of Guam Territorial Income Tax revenue. The various revenue affecting provisions make changes to the individual income tax, the corporate income tax, and the estate and gift taxes. And we've gone and broken all three of those subcategories down for further analysis. Under individual income tax, and based upon the analysis again of the Tax Policy Center, the estimated impact of changes in the individual income tax as proposed by President-elect Trump would decrease revenue by about $1,710 per household, which would be a loss of about $73.5 million for the coffers of the government of Guam, accounting for 58% of the total $126.4 million projected loss. The most significant provisions of the Trump tax plan and their estimated impacts are: 1. President-elect Trump proposes increasing standard deductions from $6,300 to $15,000 for individuals and from $12,600 to $30,000 for joint filers, potentially impacting Government of Guam revenue by $44.1 million. Additional tax bracket changes have an estimated cost of $33.4 million. Allowing expensing instead of depreciation of investment has an estimated cost impact of $26.5 million. Allowing an elective flat rate of 15% on pass-through income and taxing large pass-throughs the same as dividends has an estimated cost impact of $20.1 million. Repealing the alternative minimum tax has an estimated cost of $8.9 million. Expanding EITC and creating a new deduction for dependent care expenses has an estimated cost of $3.1 million. Eliminating head of household filing status, this is the filing status for single-parent households, has an estimated revenue gain of $3 million, but that's with the head of household not being able to take those deductions. And we have a cap itemized deductions at $100,000 for individuals and $200,000 for joint filers, with an estimated revenue gain of $11 million. There's also a repeal of personal exemptions with an estimated revenue gain of $49.3 million. So when you factor in the gains and the costs of the total proposals under his individual income tax realignment, that comes out to a $73.5 million projected revenue loss for Guam. That loss is more heavily weighted in some areas and offset with the gains in other areas. Other additional individual provisions have less significant estimated impacts. We do have a chart here that illustrates the changes of the individual income tax rate under the President-elect Trump plan, comparing filers without any dependents who take the standard deductions. The second item that we evaluated was the corporate income tax. And based upon the analysis of the Tax Policy Center, applying those analysis to the data sets that we have here on Guam, the estimated impact of changes in the corporate income tax would decrease revenue by about $1,258 per household, which would be a loss of about $54.1 million, accounting for 43% of the total $126 million in revenue losses. The most significant provisions of the Trump tax plan and their estimated impacts are: 1, a reduced corporate income tax rate to 15%, and a repeal of the corporate alternative minimum tax, estimated cost of $38 million. And 2, allowing expensing instead of depreciation of investment with an estimated cost of $20.5 million. Other additional corporate provisions have less significant estimated impacts. On the item of estate and gift taxes, the estimated impact of changes in estate and gift taxes would increase revenue by about $27 per household, which would be about a gain of about $1.2 million, accounting for about a negative 1% of the revenue loss. But just to clarify, estate taxes have a unique application here in the territory. So, and with that, I wanted to kind of backtrack on all of the data and speak to the fact that what we did was we took the Tax Policy Center's estimates and we applied them to the average number of households here on Guam. But we do know that the household demographics on Guam are quite different from the makeup of the United States. When you evaluate here the chart of the Trump tax plan, you see that a lot of the standard deductions go to zero. For example, for households that make, the marginal tax rate goes to zero for households that make $58,000 or below. But I would proffer that on our island we have a disproportionately larger number of households that earn $58,000 and below. So these estimates are based on the Tax Policy Center, but I would proffer that they are conservative with respect to how they might impact us here on Guam. Because of the fact that we may have a larger, lower middle class tax base, and because of the fact that we don't have estate taxes that generally apply here on Guam. We also did not want to just present potential revenue losses without talking about the potential offsets with respect to the additional economic activity that may be generated as a result of these tax cuts. The revenue estimates are based upon a static analysis and would thus tend to overstate the cost of the tax cuts somewhat. The Tax Policy Center presents estimated offsetting increases in revenue due to one or another of two models. One is based upon a Keynesian model. The other is a dynamic forecasting model which anticipates increases in revenue based upon improved economic performance. So we can see here that on these models, there is additional revenue that we're going to begin adding back to the potential loss. So the potential loss of $126.4 million, when you add back the potential revenue that's generated as a result of these tax cuts, it drops the losses from 126 down to 106 or 110. We've also applied a GRT impact with a multiplier effect on the revenue. So roughly 90% of consumption on Guam is of local goods and services. Thus, we expect that about $113.8 million of the tax savings to individual taxpayers would be spent on additional goods and services on Guam. This additional spending would have a multiplier effect through several rounds of consumption on Guam. Estimates of Guam's multiplier have ranged from 1 to 1.89. So depending on the multiplier, the additional first round spending would induce from from 113 to 215 million in consumption. Below is a representation of the potential offsetting impacts of these additional expenditures by assumed multiplier values. And so basically what we've done is we've taken the additional consumption income that these households would have been able to have. We multiplied it by a multiplier effect and assumed that that multiplier effect was going to be fully assessed at 4% GRT, and that 4% GRT was further added to the offsets of the total revenue impact. So from 126 million, first with the economic impact dropping that down to 110 million in losses, after factoring in additional consumption gains in GRT, we're estimating that that could drop the losses down to $98 million. And again, this is for illustrative purposes only and represents a portion of potential revenue offsets. Regardless of the basic model, the additional cost of the proposed President-elect Trump tax cut is not fully offset by increased economic activity. That's something that we wanted to make sure we stated clearly. The cost in the near term will be approximately $100 million, with variations depending upon how much additional revenue is generated by the basic model plus additional business privilege tax revenue. So in conclusion, this brief paper has considered the potential impacts of the proposed Trump tax cut on Guam's revenue. The paper has assumed that the Tax Policy Center's analysis can be applied to Guam through scaling down the impacts. However, any deviation in terms of demographics or other economic factors could generate somewhat different results. In particular, the impact of changes in the earned income tax credit and creating the deduction for dependent care could have a larger relative impact for Guam than the United States. Furthermore, the proportional rate differential between the current marginal rates and those proposed are not uniform, and therefore could be expected to increase or decrease the cost of the tax cuts depending on the income distribution of Guam's tax base. Additionally, if Guam has a lower proportion of filers who itemize their deductions, which I would probably might tend to be the case, the impact of raising the standard deduction could be higher than predicted. If the U.S. federal government were to enact the most recent proposal by President-elect Trump, the cost would be $6.2 trillion over 10 years to the United States. Excluding the estate tax change, which would not apply to Guam, a comparable impact would be about $2.2 billion for Guam over a 10-year period. Given the recent history with increasing deficits without such a change, it seems likely that this would not be affordable for the government of Guam. We also added another footnote because we have been seeing stories in our local media about a few other items, and so I wanted to make sure we address those in this paper. The impacts discussed in this paper include only those contained in President-elect Trump's tax plan and do not include planned changes to other policies, including the proposed changes affecting the eligibility of individuals and families for the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, SNAP. Any modification to that or other welfare programs may impact the revenues available to the government of Guam either directly or indirectly, as we know that those also add to our consumption rates, our GRTs, and the taxes that we generate from there. So, in a nutshell, we have a president-elect whose political party is in power in the House and the Senate. And if his most recent proposed tax policy changes begin coming to fruition in the current government, or the government to come, it's going to have significant impact on our territory. And I kind of wanted to open up the floor for some open discussion on some of the information we presented. The reason why I felt it was important for us to kind of bring this forward now is because we have been moving very, very deliberately as a commission, asking questions and discussing our process. But with these kind of potential impacts looming, we may need to begin working more expeditiously to decide whether or not delinking might be something beneficial for the island, depending on what begins to materialize as actual policy. So again, just to clarify, this is not official from President-elect Trump or from the Republican-controlled Congress or the Senate. But what we are doing is we're evaluating it on its face value so that in the event that it does begin to materialize, we are ahead of the curve rather than trying to figure out whether or not this is something that's going to be beneficial or detrimental. So I wanted to open it up to the commission for any comments, most specifically from our budget chairman or anyone else who wanted to comment on the data.
Even if it was only 10% of what you suggest, that would be more than the budget could possibly handle. So, I mean, this is frightening. But I'm looking to the good doctor, and anybody who knows what's going to happen with the administration, because we cannot afford to lose, I mean, even 12 million, much less 126 million. And we can't lose anything in this. I mean, the SNAP and the welfare is a whole different thing, and all the welfare things with health, we can't afford any of those losses, much less this. I mean, we just couldn't handle most of the programs that we're currently providing for. I mean, the only thing that might save is if we delink and don't do the EITC, that offset from the EITC might, but all you're doing is making a poor family that's receiving EITC even more poor, because now they don't have EITC, they don't have SNAP, they don't have welfare, and we don't have the revenue that's going to be able to provide any kind of to offset. It's
I'm just also thinking, if we do delink and we keep the current tax as it is, and if there are tax cuts in the United States, there are a lot of companies here on Guam that are from the States, and I don't know how beneficial it would be for them to, they have to kind of do an evaluation to see, you know, is it beneficial to, and I think that maybe one of the Trump's platforms is we want to bring back the business back to the industry back into the United States, instead of going to China and, you know, Mexico and things like that. So that might be also an issue that we want to think about as well, is how many businesses out here right now is, you know, a business that may possibly think about going back to the States.
That's a very good question. Or how many businesses do we have out here right now that are doing business here on Guam, but will find it too cumbersome to have to do tax reporting on two very different tax scales, because their main enterprise will be based on whatever is adopted on the mainland. And if we delink and adopt our current code, are they going to be interested, based on their business volumes, on incurring the necessary costs to dual file?
And likewise, would it impact those who are interested in possibly investing on Guam? If we do separate it, they have to endure the same type. Because those are some of the issues, obviously, that we would like to see, is how do we become more of a business-friendly environment, investment-friendly environment, and those are some things to consider. Would that, you know, impact us in that?
Yeah, Dr. Jones.
When was this analysis done? What's the date of this report?
This report was done over the course of This report was done over the course of the past week. Yeah, so it was based on the most recently available data.
Clearly, this is going to be a moving target as the administration takes its form, and but it's good heads up. It's really good heads up, and it's good framework for how we need to move ahead with the moving target. The target isn't just the tax complications. As you point out, it's business growth. It's what happens to the military out here, the military effects. TPP. the entire context of what the outlook is going to be for Asia and Guam's role in Asia is still uncertain. We're not alone in this, that there are other communities that, other territories that are concerned about the impact of the Trump tax plan as it's proposed. I think that as part of this heads up, we need to broaden the outlook to say what's going to happen with our business sectors, with our household sectors, with our military. What's our investment infrastructure looking like? What happens to our GDP, the projected growth of our GDP? How can we sustain a program such as this? You have some things in here about impact of local goods and the multiplier effect, and we need to look at that a little bit more carefully because we're heavily dependent upon imports. And we need to see what happens with that multiplier, given that we do import quite a bit of product into the island. It's not manufactured here. And so will we be losing money on that front? So looking at the leakages, if they accelerate as well. Health and social services, certainly they're in line with taking some significant changes. So all in all, I think this points to maybe a best case scenario, sadly, if just looking at this. So it leaves open how do we position Guam for our heads up? What's our relationship? How we can't possibly, as this goes, and there are others who can't possibly survive under this kind of outlook. So where's the critical connections to make our case heard as to what we need? And delinking is one. It could be that they might very well support the idea of delinking. And that may be a first opportunity that we've got some traction on that. If they're not necessarily supportive of that, or they haven't even considered that option yet, what other kinds of subsidies, what other kinds of offsets can we package to say this tax plan has to be, this is our suggestions for offsets, what we're going to need to do this. Delinking is one, but other areas as well. So this is my first look at this. I've kind of marked it up. I think we've got some, as I said, a good heads up. It needs to be integrated with other data that we have about the island and begin to put this portrait together of impact from lots of perspectives. So Julian, I really appreciate the work, and Senator, your work, and the Commission's work ahead to include this.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. And so just to clarify again for the record, you were stating that the $126 million revenue loss may very well be a best case scenario.
Only because there are so many other issues out there. What happens with our tourism industry? Again, in light of TPP, in light of the relationship with Asia. What happens with the military investment? So those questions aren't part of this. This is just looking at the base that we have right now. And if it drives business activity away, if our import expenses and leakages increase, there may be more to this story than that number. So I think we need to look at what else is affected by this, the bigger outlook. And as far as this dollar amount, I think that's just taken from where we are today. We're assuming that we'll continue the growth trajectory that we have. And in this idea of best case, it's what if our growth trajectory declines? What if there is an economic pullback, which you're alluding to with the business community? What happens if our tourism and military sectors are affected as well? So that's the background on my statement. I think there's more to this story than simply this. More offset opportunities as well. We haven't seen fully those yet, but. This is a number worth paying attention to.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. Well, and that's one of the reasons why, we really wanted to have this discussion. I'm very concerned about the idea of us being in any way behind the curve on this. If we don't have a handle on what the impacts might be, we're not going to know what to do. Whether delinking might be something to move forward more expeditiously, or whether we may need to intensify lobbying efforts for certain exemptions from the Trump tax plan. But it's very difficult for us to pinpoint how to react if we're not quite sure what the impact is going to be. And I think that I very much agree with Dr. Jones that we need to fully understand the various component parts of what we're talking about here. What we do have in front of us is a very broad stroke evaluation of tax policy as it relates to some of our local data. But again, it does not take into consideration the other policy changes that may be coming down from a President-elect Trump's administration with respect to food stamp benefits and Medicaid and Medicare and some of these other federal government programs that inject a significant amount of revenue into our government coffers, not to mention how these policies, again, attract businesses or may cause businesses to no longer be interested in doing business here if we have a different tax regime. I think that the Commission needs to, we definitely need to step up and try and assist our government and our island with an idea of how we can go about getting a better handle on these concerns, so that we can make informed recommendations as soon as any of these things begin to materialize. I am concerned also that because President Trump and his political party is empowered throughout the House and the Senate, if he moves forward with a very aggressive first 100 days in office, it's very difficult to say what that's going to look like. And I'm concerned that some of these things might be right up there at the top of the list. And if that is the case, then by the first quarter of next calendar year, it's very possible that we would be staring in the face of some of these items.
I think that I think as a community we have to get together and look at all angles and improve in our economic activity in every angle. But reality is, I think the military has it has the lion's share of how we do as a community. And so I think that even though we improve in every area and think outside of the box and improve that activity, we have to, I think, put a lot of effort in what is happening with that military buildup. What can we seek? Because I think, we want to be self-sustaining, but I think with the timeline, like you were saying, that President Trump is we don't know what to expect. The first 100 days could be very swift. And so I think working, and I'm not versed in, the political, how we move with the federal government, but I think that's something that we need to start having discussion quite quickly with maybe Congresswoman Berdalia. Yeah.
One of the other problems that needs to be put into this equation is your discussion about the need to what's going to happen with the military. Even if we get the $170 million that's in the NDAA currently, the fact that the construction is not going to be able to start, and until the construction is started and completed, we won't have the additional 5,000. Putting that down, pushing that even further down the line without the H2, or even what would happen in the event that everybody has to bring in union workers from Oklahoma and Nevada what would that do to the business community? And how would that affect everybody's corporate income tax that are right now are paying H2 prevailing as opposed to union wages from Nevada and the Midwest? That would even have a greater impact.
And just to kind of underscore as well, I very much agree, Sandy, that absolutely those additional economic activities would help. But if there's a change in tax policy, that could be pretty immediate. And once brackets change or anything like that, those things will become immediate to our financial position, especially with tax season just rolling around. I mean, I can just imagine a Trump presidency wanting to impact filers this tax year, And so if he changes all of these things immediately to affect the current tax filing season, we could very well see these impacts immediately. And even if we do stimulate or in whatever way, shape, or form, those things take a while for it to pass through into our economy, into our revenue stream, and so we may be facing significant impacts with a very long, with the offsets having a very long, drawn out, time horizon. So I kind of just wanted to put the Tax Commission on notice that we may be at the helm of a very urgent situation, and the community may actually be looking to us to stave this off. One of the things that I want to put on the table for the body to think about and mull over is if we delink and adopt the current code, granted there may be impacts on businesses wanting to backshore to the mainland. We may have businesses that would want to reconsider doing business here on Guam. But again, those adverse impacts will be more drawn out versus the immediate impact of the tax cuts and us not having any way to prevent ourselves from being dragged along with that. It may be something to consider that we delink and adopt, and then as we see the impacts to our business community, we make adjustments to our code in order to prevent any loss, while at the same time protecting the greater community from this dramatic revenue impact. Because I think that the business community also here on Guam, with a $126 million impact on our government revenue, I don't think anybody will come out ahead. I think that we're all going to suffer pretty dramatically from that as a greater community.
Has there been any feedback from the administration, at least, or any discussions from the administration?
This analysis has been presented first to
Sure.
the Commission, but we are going to be forwarding it to the administration.
It would actually, this would impact the
Yes.
government as a whole.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
and
so-
we are going to impress upon the governor the urgency
Yeah.
of this concern, especially with respect to the upcoming tax
Yeah,
season.
because this is going to impact. This is obviously going to have an inclusion of Congressman Dalio, the governor's office in D.C., and possibly using the relationships that they've built, hopefully the relationship that they built in the last 6 months or so,
Right.
in using that. And, so just kind of curious on that angle.
Right.
Yeah.
Dr. Jones.
One of the things to keep in mind that there's an awful lot of uncertainty here with the new administration coming into office and how they're going to approach working with Congress and how they get anything through. There is an expectation that things will move pretty quickly because of the makeup of Congress. However, we'll have probably some initial impacts about this uncertainty. Businesses will be somewhat reluctant to make long-term decisions. So people will begin to act as if this is happening. And so I think even though we are looking to a future, it could be 100 days, it could be longer, when this is already in the mix, people begin to hold off, not make investments in anticipation of what might happen. So we need to monitor that with our own economy as to what kind of announcement effect this will have on our business community and the decisions that they're making, and kind of monitoring how we're seeing some early impacts, or maybe not yet. But economies never like uncertainty, and the more that we can help as a government and as a commission where we can to give some stability and some certainty with whatever information that we do have, it should help stave off some of that.
Did anybody have anything else they'd like to add to the conversation at this time? Sandy?
Just thank you very much. I think your team did a very good job, and I like this proactive meeting, and I think it's something that the community should be discussing right now. Like you said, the administration, Congresswoman, chamber, the public. So this is great. I want to thank you very much for all your hard work.
So with that, as I stated, we'll go ahead and be forwarding these initial analysis to the governor, office of the governor, and we will be in direct communication with him to seek advisement on what kind of a working group or whatever we need to start pulling together to be able to get in front of this. This is definitely not something that we can be behind on. This potential impact is even just a month of trying to play catch up on this is going to be devastating. So I'm very grateful for the commission being here today, for your time taking a look at the work that we have, and we definitely will be reaching back out as soon as we have a greater sense of how we're going to go about trying to put together a working group to get in front of this. And that working group will include the tax commission. But as advised also by Dr. Jones, we are going to need to begin pulling in the chamber, the various sectors of the community to be able to get a greater handle on the overall picture. But what we probably should keep front of mind is that I'm of the opinion that while all the other impacts, the SNAP program, Medicaid, and everything else, those are definitely an issue. It's this tax impact that I think will have the most dramatic and immediate effect if we are in any way unprepared for something dramatic to happen within the first 100 days of the Trump presidency. So I would like for us to keep the tax concerns front of mind, but we do definitely need to pull together the various component parts of our community to address all the other potential impacts that are starting to materialize as everybody gets a firmer handle on the proposals of the Trump administration. Mr. Vice Speaker, any last words on budget? No.
I also want to congratulate and thank your staff for this. I wish I had seen this yesterday. It would sure have helped in my decision making. Who wants this? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Speaker. So if that's all we have for today, we'll go ahead and conclude open discussions. Could I get a motion from a member for us to forward our findings to Magalahin Guahan, to our Congresswoman Bordalio, to the Guam Chamber of Commerce? And is there any other particular entities at this time that the Commission would like us to officially forward these findings to?
So moved, and we'll leave it up to the chair to add additional people that he believes, as we call in and say maybe these people ought to be included in the discussion. But for sure, Mr. Chairman, to move to have you and your staff get the word out to as many people as possible. And that's my motion.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Speaker. Is there a second? Thank you, Ms. McKeever. It's been moved and seconded. Any objections? No objections, so ordered. The Commission will begin forwarding the findings and trying to pull together the necessary members of the community for us to be able to get in front of this issue. Are there any other motions that need to be entertained by the Commission at this time? If not, we'll go ahead and move on to our public comment portion. Is there any members of the community who had any statements they'd like to make before the Commission? If none, I did want to make one quick announcement. We do have a typical meeting schedule that was written into the mandate for the Tax Commission. That would have us go into a meeting early part of January. We may have a different chairman, and we may need to reconstitute the commission at that time. But given also in light of these circumstances that we brought before the commission, I would just like to ask everybody to continue operating as if it was going to be status quo, because I would assume that at this juncture, we would want as little internal change as possible with the organization so that we can have as much continuity as we try to address this looming concern. So if everyone can just continue to operate on a status quo basis, and the chairman of the tax commission will continue to update the membership as needed. Okay. And with that, do we have a motion to adjourn? Moved by Mr. Shringi, second by Ms. McKeever. Thank you all very much for joining us today for today's meeting. We will adjourn at 10:50 this morning. Thank you very much.